Good evening and welcome to the fourth lecture of the Ayn Rand Institute's 2003 series. My name is Mark Chapman and I'm the Vice President of Development for the Institute, which is headquartered here in Irvine, California. The Ayn Rand Institute is a nonprofit organization and all of our programs are funded by private donations from corporations, foundations, and the generosity of many individuals throughout the U.S. and around the world. Tonight's lecture has been made possible by these contributions, and with this continued support, we look forward to offering many more of these lecture events. If you enjoy coming to our lecture series and see the value in promoting the Institute's positions to ever-widening audiences, please consider making a contribution on your way out tonight. With your help, we can make a difference. Now a few brief announcements before we begin tonight's lecture. At the back of the room, we have information about the Institute's programs, as well as free literature on a number of topics for you to take home and read at your leisure. We have an extensive selection of Ayn Rand's books and other publications available for purchase, including videotapes of previous lectures in this event series, and you can pre-order a videotape of tonight's talk. I would also like to announce that the Institute will be sponsoring a 12-day summer conference here in Southern California beginning on July the 5th. The conference is an annual event attended from all over the world and is a great learning experience covering many topics. Information on the summer conference is also available in the back. Finally, we'd like to announce that the next lecture in the series will take place here at the Hyatt the week of Monday, September the 8th. The actual date hasn't been finalized, but it'll be that week of the September the 8th, and is entitled 9/11, 2 years later, Why America is Still Losing the War. Okay, for tonight our speaker is Dr. Onkar Ghate, resident fellow at the Ayn Rand Institute. Dr. Ghate has lectured on philosophy and objectivism throughout North America and currently teaches at the Institute's Objectivist Academic Center. This past academic year, he taught a year-long undergraduate course on Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism and a year-long undergraduate course on philosophy and Introduction to Objectivism evening classes. Dr. Ghate received his doctorate in philosophy from the University of Calgary, has published numerous op-eds on education and war-related issues in newspapers and on the web, and he often appears as a guest commentator on radio talk shows. Tonight's lecture is entitled Ayn Rand's Ideas and Introduction. At the end of the lecture, Dr. Yaron Brook, President and Executive Director of the Ayn Rand Institute, will join Dr. Ghate to take questions from the audience. So if you have questions at that time, please step up to the mic located here in the center aisle. And now please join me in welcoming Dr. Onkar Ghate.
Good evening. Tonight is the 8th talk in the series of free lectures that the Ayn Rand Institute has been putting on since last September. The talks so far have focused on current affairs of importance to the nation. In regard to foreign affairs, more than one speaker has argued that America is not doing nearly enough in its war against its enemies. Undermined by deeply flawed ideas, it was argued the Bush administration refuses to make American self-defense its ruling principle, refuses to uncompromisingly support our only true ally in the Mideast, Israel. It refuses to understand, denounce, and disarm the ideology motivating our enemies. The American public, undermined by the same ideas, acquiesces. In regard to domestic affairs, one talk focused on the war against CEOs, showing how the anti-freedom forces were using the scandals at Enron and elsewhere to further strangle corporate America. The talk also indicated how the instruction offered at America's business schools was contributing to the decay of business. Another talk focused on the ideologies of multiculturalism and environmentalism. There it was argued that these ideologies, if they gain more political power, will result in widespread destruction. Taken as a whole, then, the talks have sounded an alarm, an ideological alarm. There are ideas eating away at the greatness of America. Now, these ideas can be opposed, successfully opposed, but only if one knows what they are and one has better ideas to offer. It took years of thought on the part of history's greatest political thinkers and the effort then of individual citizens to understand and embrace the new ideas to create the United States of America. Today, no less an effort is required to restore America to vitality. Now, in her books, Ayn Rand exposes the false and pernicious ideas destroying America and the West, a set of ideas she often labeled the axis of collectivism, altruism, mysticism, the true axis of evil, the axis of evil responsible for all the other evils in the world. And even more importantly, in her writings, she presents, explains, and defends the positive ideas that one must uphold to reach the achievements and grandeur that is possible to man, the allied ideas of individualism, egoism, reason. Now, Ayn Rand is best known as an advocate of individualism and capitalism, but that's not how she saw herself. In 1971, she wrote, quote, "I am not primarily an advocate of capitalism, but of egoism. And I'm not primarily an advocate of egoism, but of reason. If one recognizes the supremacy of reason and applies it consistently, all the rest follows." Close quote. This evening we'll explore why Ayn Rand described herself in this way. So the task tonight is to introduce you to Ayn Rand's ideas by sketching the axis of collectivism, altruism, mysticism, and Ayn Rand's radical alternative to it, individualism, egoism, reason. In doing this, I'm going to periodically illustrate how these abstract ideas shape some of the subjects covered in previous talks. But don't worry if you haven't heard those talks, what I say should be intelligible on its own. So let's begin with the first, collectivism versus individualism. Collectivism is the theory that in social matters the group is supreme, the individual dispensable. Collectivism views the group as a living, breathing whole, and the individual as a fragment of the group, owing allegiance and service to it. Individualism, by contrast, is the view that in social matters the individual is supreme, sovereign. A group, like a law firm, for instance, is simply a byproduct of individual choices, voluntarily formed by individuals to advance their own interests. Now, the theory of collectivism swept through the universities and intellectual circles of the 19th century in the form of the teachings of Marx, Hegel, Dewey, and their disciples. As a result, it swept away the property, dreams, and lives of countless millions in the 20th century. In Europe, the collective was conceived sometimes along national and/or racial lines. For the Italian fascists, for instance, the nation was the unit of value and the individual its humble, dispensable servant. In Nazi Germany, the collective was conceived as the Aryan race and as the fatherland. Any individual standing in the way of either was killed. More often, the collective was defined in terms of economic classes, as country after country went socialistic. In the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, socialism reached its full systematic expression in the dictatorship of the proletariat. Individuals were chained together, unable to free the country, and forced to serve their fellow men. The result was the misery and death of millions of individuals, sacrificed in the so-called Great Experiment. You have to break some individual eggs to make an omelet. That was the justification for the atrocities. And even in the United States, a country founded on the rights of the individual, collectivist ideas penetrated in the 20th century. Here, the collective was conceived of as the public at large. The government was charged with the responsibility of securing the so-called public interest. So increasingly, the government controlled, regulated, and tied the individual to make sure that he served the public interest. The 16th Amendment, for instance, which gave the federal government the power to tax our incomes, was ratified in 1913 in order to take from the hands of private individuals and give to public causes. A vast new system of regulatory agencies was created in the 20th century, the FDA, SEC, FCC, FAA, and so on, to dictate to an individual how he has to act in the public interest. There was also an explosion of so-called group rights, not the rights of the individual to pursue his own life and happiness, but the alleged rights of collectives to the products of others, the rights of the poor to a job, the elderly to health care, the ignorant to an education. Who is to provide these collectives with all this loot? Individual businessmen and doctors and teachers whose unseen lives and shattered dreams are considered unimportant, unreal. You cannot understand the 20th century without understanding the rise of collectivism. Now today, for the moment at least, collectivism as a worldwide crusade has been abandoned. Few could stomach its destruction and death. Nevertheless, without an intellectual alternative to replace it, the collectivist mentality still haunts the halls of academia and programs America's leaders and institutions. You can see this simply by considering some of the subjects analyzed in earlier talks in this lecture series. America's foreign policy, for instance, is conducted through a collectivist lens. In the reconstruction of Iraq, for example, plans are drawn up in collectivist terms. The administration speaks of Iraqi oil as though property belongs to the group rather than to the individuals who discover and develop it. The administration talks of an Iraqi government formed along ethnic and tribal lines, that is, split up into warring collectives. And the administration speaks not of individual rights, but of democracy as the ideal to achieve in Iraq. Now, what democracy actually means is unlimited majority rule, mob rule, rule by the largest gang. Now, our domestic affairs are no better. Under the bombardment of the multiculturalist, for instance, many of America's students now see the world not in terms of individuals, but of various racial, ethnic, and other collectives. Whites versus Asians, males versus females, Westerners versus Africans. The result is a growing balkanization across the nation. Or take the war on CEOs in the wake of the scandals at Enron and WorldCom, which Dr. Brooks spoke about last year. Instead of Americans demanding that their government prosecute any individuals guilty of fraud, Americans demanded punitive new regulations against all businessmen. If you object that the vast majority of CEOs, of individual CEOs, are innocent of any crime, the reply will be, so what? The individual businessman must be sacrificed to the public interest. In principle, there is no difference between such punitive action against businessmen and imposing, say, in the wake of an Asian committing a late-night robbery, a 9 p.m. curfew on every single Asian. Now, the antidote to collectivism is individualism. In the 20th century, Ayn Rand was one of the few and the greatest champions of individualism. It is the individual, not some group or collective, she argued passionately and extensively. It's the individual that thinks, breathes, values, judges, lives. It is the individual who chooses to be rational or irrational, productive or unproductive, honest or dishonest, just or unjust. It is the individual human being who lives or dies. And so it is to the individual human being that things are good or evil. In social matters, the individual must be the unit of value. The individual and the requirements of his life must be the focus. The individual, not the group, is sovereign. Now, in terms of social systems, the expression of individualism is laissez-faire capitalism. Laissez-faire capitalism, in Ayn Rand's words, is a social system based on the recognition of individual rights, including property rights in which all property is privately owned. Laissez-faire capitalism, in other words, is a system that results when individual rights are protected as an absolute. The purpose of a right is to define and sanction an individual's freedom of action in civil society. It defines the area in which the individual is sovereign, the sphere in which he is free to think, to judge, to act on his own, the sphere in which no one, not his neighbor or his government, can legitimately encroach. The rights of life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness are the means, the only means of safeguarding the individual in society. The right to life is the individual's right to take those actions that his life requires. It includes the right to liberty, which is the individual's right to use his mind to think and act, and encompasses such things as freedom of thought and speech. The right to life includes the right to property, which is the individual's right to keep, use, and dispose of all the material values that he has produced. And the right to life includes the right to the pursuit of happiness, which is the individual's right to define his own goals and to try to achieve them. Rights are not entitlements to the product or effort of others, to a job at Microsoft or the services of a doctor, say. Rights require that each individual make his own way in the world. So individual rights blast away the collectivist notion that man is tied to other men. In a system that protects individual rights, each man is free to go his own way. He must simply refrain from violating the rights of others. He deals with others only by choice and by mutual consent, when each individual judges that he'll benefit from the interaction, whether the value involved is material or spiritual, money or knowledge, commerce or romance. So in a capitalist system, in other words, all relationships are voluntary, and men deal with one another not as master and slave, exploiter and exploited, but as fellow traders. The government in a truly capitalist system is restricted to one and only one vital role, the protection of individual rights. The government's responsibility is to ban the initiation of physical force, to stop criminals and foreign aggressors from violating people's rights, as well as to objectively adjudicate among individual citizens when one alleges that the other's actions violates his rights. So for instance, breach of contract disputes. Otherwise, the government is hands-off. The government must leave the individual alone. It has no power to dictate or control the individual's thought or speech. There is complete separation of church and state. The government also has no power to emulate a criminal and violate property rights, to redistribute income, to hand out free education or health care, to control where an individual lives, whom he can hire, and how much he has to pay them. So there is also, in other words, a complete separation of economics and state. Now, the individualistic system of laissez-faire capitalism has never been fully implemented. Today's mixed economies and welfare states, with their myriad of controls, regulatory bodies, 2,000-page trade deals, and tax codes, are certainly not examples of capitalism. But thanks to the thinkers of the Enlightenment, to John Locke and America's founding fathers, laissez-faire capitalism was approached in America for a few shining decades in the 18th and 19th centuries. The system they created had some contradictory elements, but the basic purpose of government was correctly defined: to secure and protect the rights of the individual. The result was an explosion of prosperity and progress, not the dog-eat-dog world of capitalism's critics, and turned into a daily reality by every collectivist system, but a world where the individual's standard of living and quality of life was rising rapidly. But it didn't last. As I said earlier, collectivism gained intellectual currency in the 19th century and political power in the 20th century. Why? Where were capitalism's defenders? Unfortunately, the system geared to the requirements of the individual and his life had no crusaders on its behalf. For the most part, capitalism, or those who defended capitalism, did so on collectivist grounds. Capitalism, they said, is the best means to advance the public's, the group's, interest. This defense was worse than futile. This approach declared the goals of the socialist, fascist, communist are noble, but the means by which they try to achieve them are mistaken. Subordinate the individual to the collective. Yes, by all means, capitalism's defenders said, but please grant the individual some economic freedom so that he can produce more riches for the collective. So this approach demanded of men a blatant contradiction: create an ideal social system that elevates the collective and denies the individual by means of a social system based on the individual's right to life. Create good by indulging in evil. Unsurprisingly, men turned away from capitalism and its defenders in droves, and instead sought collectivist means to collectivism's noble end. But why was collectivism the desired end? Why in social matters is the public interest the unquestioned ideal? The conflict of collectivism versus individualism is at root a moral conflict. Before Ayn Rand, no one had dared to defend the individualist system of laissez-faire capitalism on moral grounds. No one had said that the individual has a moral right to exist for his own sake. No one had said that the good is for the individual to live selfishly for his own life. Capitalism, therefore, the system of the individual, died before it had fully lived. So underneath the conflict of collectivism versus individualism lies a more fundamental conflict, altruism versus egoism, or self-sacrifice versus self-interest. That is the conflict we must now examine. So we turn now to egoism versus altruism. The morality of altruism, or self-sacrifice, is the doctrine that an individual has no moral right to exist for his own sake. An individual gains moral credit on this view only to the extent that his motive is to serve others. The indispensable path to nobility, according to altruism, is to deny the self, to stamp out any element of selfishness within one's soul. Now, since the rise of Christianity, the morality of sacrifice has dominated the Western mind. Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, and do good to them that hate you, Jesus commanded his followers. Now, why is such action noble? Precisely because it is a sacrifice. To give your love to friends is selfish. You gain a tremendous amount of pleasure, knowledge, joy from spending time with your friends and watching their lives and accomplishments. But you get no benefit from your enemy. He brings you harm. To give your love to him, nevertheless, is a sacrifice. To show a thief a kindness that he has not earned, or to give a killer like bin Laden a pardon he does not deserve, that reveals a noble soul. A corrupt soul, by contrast, is one that is out for personal gain. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of an eye of a needle, Jesus told his followers, than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Now why? Because a man producing riches, a prosperous farmer, say, is concerned with improving his life, with creating the values he needs to survive and be happy. He is not denying himself. He's being selfish, not self-sacrificial, egoistic, not altruistic. He is therefore evil, not good. Now, Jesus demanded self-sacrifice for the sake of God. Later, secular moralists kept the essence of Christianity's view, but replaced God with the collective. Your duty now was to sacrifice for society. So it is altruism, therefore, that leads to the abandonment of capitalism and the worldwide adoration of collectivism. In the name of morality, altruism demands that the individual be chained to the collective. The individual has no moral right to pursue his own values, interests, and life. He is to serve and slave away for others, to obey the wishes and commands of the group. Every collectivist movement justified and justifies itself on altruistic grounds. From the welfare state in America, to socialism in Russia, to fascism in Germany, the cry has been, we're moral, we're noble, because we're creating a society in which the individual cannot be selfish, a society in which he is forced to be self-sacrificial. So long as altruism is considered moral, there is no answer to this cry for human blood. And if we turn from the 20th century to the contemporary scene, the influence of altruism remains easy to see. It's all around us. Think again simply of some of the subjects covered in past talks. In foreign affairs, the Islamic militants are motivated by the morality of sacrifice. In the name of serving tribe and God, they sacrifice their lives in murderous rampages. And our own defense against them is unfortunately shaped by a similar morality. Altruism explains why, at the first sign of opposition, for instance, the State Department justifies the war in self-sacrificial terms. Don't accuse us of self-interest, they say. We're doing this for the poor Afghanis or Iraqis. Altruism explains why America will not support Israel consistently, our only true ally in the Middle East. To love your friend is selfish. To throw him to the terrorist is self-sacrificial. And altruism explains why we needlessly risk the lives of our own soldiers in the war. We ordered them, for instance, to drop food packages over hostile territory and to refrain from firing back at the enemy if civilians might be caught in the line of fire. The policy was carried out to such a horrific extent as to require our soldiers in Iraq during combat to consult a lawyer about whom they could fire back at and with what weapons. To switch to domestic affairs, the war against CEOs is obviously an attack on egoism. We need to shackle the Michael Dales and Jack Welches of the corporate world because they are selfish. They've committed no crime, you object? Well, who cares? They are morally evil. Their very goal to make profits proves this, and we need the government to step in to protect us from them before it is too late. Or take environmentalism, another topic of a previous talk. Sacrifice your hydroelectric dams, your cancer-fighting drugs and SUVs, it demands, so that snail darters may endure. To save yourself from the life-negating influence of altruism, you need a different, a positive, a life-affirming morality. This is what Ayn Rand has provided. She is the first thinker to defend and validate what she called the virtue of rational selfishness. Now, Ayn Rand, unlike previous thinkers and almost every layman, does not regard the existence of altruism as an inescapable fact of reality, like the law of gravity, which we must adjust ourselves to. Ayn Rand begins by asking, why does man need the subject of ethics? Why does he need a moral code? Only if you first have an answer to this question can you identify what specific moral code man needs, and whether that code is altruism or egoism. Man's need of morality, Ayn Rand argues in detail in her writings, is rooted in his nature as an individual living being. Like other animals, man faces the constant alternative of life or death. But unlike other animals, man does not act automatically to sustain his life. An eagle, for instance, acts automatically to hunt rabbits, but man does not know automatically what sustains his life, what goals he must pursue, and how he must achieve them. He doesn't automatically know, for instance, that rabbits are good to hunt, but that a lion could kill him. He doesn't automatically know that the power of electricity can be harnessed to run his washing machines and lights and heating, but that standing outside in a lightning storm could kill him. He doesn't automatically know that freedom is a requirement of his life and that socialism undermines it. He must discover all this knowledge by his own choice and effort, and then he must choose to put this knowledge into practice. This is the purpose of morality, to teach the individual how to live and prosper. Morality gives one fundamental guidance by specifying the values one must reach and the virtues one must practice in order to achieve life and happiness. Morality won't tell you specifically, say, that a rabbit is good to eat, nor how to hunt a rabbit. But it will tell you that to live you must be productive, not a parasite who tries to live by force or fraud off of others. And morality will explain what it means to be productive as a matter of principle across the board in every area of life. Again, morality won't tell you how specifically to invent an electric generator, but it will tell you that to live and create, you must function by your own independent mind and judgment. And it will explain what it means to be independent as a matter of principle. So the purpose of morality is not to teach you how to sacrifice your life, but how to achieve it. The proper standard in ethics, therefore, the root principle of Ayn Rand's new code of morality, is the requirements of man's life as set by his nature. To quote Ayn Rand, the standard of value of the objectivist ethics, the standard by which one judges what is good or evil, is man's life, or that which is required for man's survival qua man. Close quote. Now, there's one fundamental fact that you have to grasp about man's nature in order to understand Ayn Rand's new code of morality. It's a fact that Ayn Rand was the first to fully identify and appreciate. And that fact is that reason is man's basic means of survival. Every human value necessary to sustain life is a product of thought. From growing a field of wheat, to building a fire, to catching a rabbit, to inventing a wheel, to discovering the physical laws of motion, to building a steam engine, to composing a symphony, to designing a computer chip, to running Walmart. Every human value flows from a mind devoted to the thinking necessary to reach and apply knowledge. To remain alive, Ayn Rand observes, man must first think and then produce. Man is the rational animal, she argues, and the Industrial Revolution so vividly illustrates, because he survives by reason. The principles of ethics, therefore, must acknowledge this crucial fact about man's nature. To quote Ayn Rand again, man's life, as required by his nature, is not the life of a mindless brute, of a looting thug or a mooching mystic, but the life of a thinking being, not life by means of force or fraud, but life by means of achievement, not survival at any price, since there's only one price that pays for man's survival, reason. Close quote. So one's self-interest cannot be achieved by doing whatever one wishes, by following one's emotions blindly, by acting on whatever urge happens to strike one. Down that path does not lie science, art, technology, business. To be selfish means to systematically pursue the values that will in fact benefit, secure, and enhance one's life. Selfishness demands precise, rigorous, scientific, logical thought about one's life and every action it encompasses. Rationality, therefore, is the highest virtue in Ayn Rand's code of morality. As a principle, rationality names a profound dedication to one's mind and faculty of reason. It means one is committed to the effort necessary to think, committed to the goal of reaching knowledge, committed to the method by which one reaches knowledge, logic, committed to expanding the power and efficacy of one's mind, committed to putting one's knowledge into practice wholly in the service of one's values and life. Rationality demands that one place nothing above the judgment of one's reasoning mind. No commandments from tribal leaders, from prophets, from kings, from popes, from one's neighbors, or from one's own emotions. It means that in one's minds, the fact and reality are an absolute. It means that the discovery of truth will never be tossed aside in one's mind because the truth is too difficult to reach or practice, because it conflicts with the opinions of others, or because it conflicts with one's own preconceived notions or wishes. The most selfish of all things, writes Ayn Rand, is the independent mind that recognizes no authority higher than its own and no value higher than its judgment of truth. Close quote. So you should now see why you need the morality of rational self-interest to defend capitalism. Capitalism, we said, is the system of the individual, the social system in which the individual is free to live, think, and pursue his own profit. It can be upheld as a political ideal only when the individual's selfish pursuit of his own life is upheld as a moral ideal. And that is what Ayn Rand's code of morality provides. From beginning to end, Ayn Rand's approach to ethics is factual, logical, scientific, objective. She asks what facts give rise to man's need of morality, and answers the fact that man is a living being who doesn't act automatically to sustain his life, nor to acquire the knowledge needed to live. The purpose of morality, therefore, is to define the principles that man must choose to follow in order to live and prosper. How does one objectively define such principles? By studying the facts of reality and of man's nature. Observation of fact reveals that man survives by reason. The root virtue he must practice, therefore, is rationality. Ayn Rand then goes on in her writings to elaborate on what rationality involves and entails. In the course of doing so, she defines a set of derivative virtues: independence, justice, integrity, honesty, productiveness, pride. Now that is a scientific, rational approach to ethics. By contrast, altruism, or the morality of sacrifice, is neither scientific nor rational. It can give you no reason to sacrifice your values and bleed your life away. The religious version of the morality of sacrifice, for instance, demands that you drop reason and have faith in a supernatural power which commands the individual to serve and obey it. But, you say, you have no evidence that such a supernatural power exists, let alone that you should serve it? So what? Drop your mind, your independent judgment, the need for evidence and logical argument, the altruists demand, and blindly submit to the authority of the supernatural's representatives here on earth, to Christ, Muhammad, the Pope, Osama bin Laden. Somehow, they know things you cannot. Now, if you're not so unselfish as to sacrifice your mind to this mystical demand, the altruists throw you a bone. By some inexplicable means, in some unspecifiable next life, they promise you, if you submit, you'll reach heaven. To swallow this promise is already to have surrendered your mind. Now, the secular version of the morality of sacrifice demands that you drop reason and have faith in the collective. Whether conceived as the race, the proletariat, the nation, or the public, the collective is a mystical living beast, and you an insignificant fragment born with the duty to serve it. But, you protest again, you have no evidence to think that there is such a collective, nor that such duties exist. So what? Drop your mind, your independent judgment, the need for evidence and logical argument, and blindly submit to the authority of the collective's representatives, to Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, Attila, a bureaucrat in Washington. And again, if you're not so unselfish as to sacrifice your mind to this mystical demand, the altruists again throw you a bone. By some inexplicable means, in some unspecifiable future, they promise you, if you submit, your sacrifices will produce heaven on earth. Again, to swallow this promise is already to have surrendered your mind. The enemy of altruism, in other words, is reason and logic. To quote Ayn Rand again, there is one word, a single word, which can blast the morality of altruism out of existence. The word why. Why must man live for the sake of others? There is no earthly reason for it. It was mysticism, the unearthly, the supernatural, the irrational, that has always been called upon to justify it, or to be exact, to escape the necessity of justification. Reason and altruism are incompatible, close quote. So just as underlying the conflict of collectivism versus individualism is a more fundamental conflict, altruism versus egoism, so underlying this conflict is a still more fundamental conflict, the one we will now briefly turn our attention to, mysticism versus reason. So that's the third of the warring ideas, mysticism versus reason. Now, after Aristotle, who's the father of logic, reason's greatest champion is Ayn Rand. Her most profound discoveries concern the nature and power of the individual rational mind. Reason, to state her definition, is the faculty that identifies and integrates the material provided by man's senses. In essence, reason begins with sensory data. It identifies this data abstractly in terms of concepts, microphone, money, electricity, and then, by the method of logic, integrates these concepts into conclusions, principles, theories, such as the law of supply and demand or the theory of electromagnetism. In Ayn Rand's writings and teachings, the details of which, of course, are beyond our scope here, she offers a new understanding of the elements of reason. With regard to the senses, for instance, she explains why the data they provide is unquestionably valid. As physical causal systems, our sense organs respond to the facts of reality, to all the facts they encounter. Our sense organs have no power of choice and therefore no power to lie or deceive or distort. Like a thermometer, they simply register the existing conditions of reality. The awareness the senses provide, therefore, is an absolute. That awareness is our primary contact with reality. the only direct evidence of reality that we possess, and the foundation and test for all subsequent knowledge. So one aspect of what it means to follow reason, then, is to work to observe the facts and hold one's observations as an absolute. An excellent symbol here to keep in mind in one's daily thinking is Galileo. He worked arduously to build and refine telescopes so that he could better observe the sun, the moon, Venus. He thereby discovered such things as the mountainous surface of the moon, sunspots, and the satellites of Venus. He then tossed out any theories or ideas that conflicted with his perceptual observations. By contrast, the leaders of the church and other mystics refused to look through Galileo's telescope or arbitrarily denied the validity of his observations in order to cling to their preconceived notions and dogmas. So to follow reason, one must gather and respect facts. But one cannot stop there. One must do something with those facts. One must abstract from them, conceptualize them, classify them. And Ayn Rand, for the first time, explains the details of this crucial process. She shows that abstractions or concepts allow us to logically organize and classify the things in this world by means of the existing mathematical relationship the things bear to one another. She then goes on to specify principles for such issues as when conceptual classifications are valid and invalid, how to formulate a proper definition, and under what conditions a definition is true or false. So another aspect of what it means to follow reason, then, is to work to classify, to abstract from, to conceptualize one's perceptual observations. A good example here to try to emulate in one's thinking is Darwin. Other people had observed different birds and animals and plants, but they had done nothing with those observations, simply noting that different organisms were different. Darwin, on the other hand, systematically related his observations one to the other. He looked for similarities across different organisms in terms of their form and function and capabilities. He asked himself questions and sought to classify and abstract from what he had observed. This put him on the road to replacing the mystical dogmas repeated for centuries with the scientific principles of natural selection and evolution. So to follow reason, one must also objectively conceptualize and classify the facts. But even that is not enough. One must then interconnect the resulting conceptualizations and classifications into a seamless, consistent set of ideas and principles. This is what logic accomplishes. As Aristotle discovered, the basic law of logic is the law of non-contradiction. A thing cannot be both A and non-A at the same time and in the same respect. A is A, and contradictions cannot exist. If in one's thought one obeys this fundamental law of reality and its various derivatives and implications, Aristotle showed, one will arrive at a consistent reality-based set of ideas. In her own writings, Ayn Rand goes on to further refine our understanding of logic, of what it means to interconnect ideas together and to root out contradictions. The result of the method of logic, she shows, is to reach certainty. So the last aspect of what it means to follow reason is to work systematically to integrate one's ideas into a non-contradictory sum. An uplifting example here to keep in mind for one's thought is Newton, who logically interconnected seemingly disparate, unrelated phenomena, the motion of an apple falling to the ground, of the moon circulating the earth, of a cannonball shot from a cannon. He integrated all that into the basic set of laws of motion. Ayn Rand's own thinking, incidentally, is also replete with such examples. She too logically interconnected together seemingly unrelated things, morality and practicality, romanticism and art with free will and philosophy, sex with economics. For the details, you'll have to see her writings. So to follow reason is a demanding process. One must follow painstakingly and step by step, the evidence from reality. One must observe, conceptualize, logically infer. This is the process that Ayn Rand can teach you to practice and perfect. Cold, hard, scientific, logical thought. That is what has brought us all the values we should cherish: science, medicine, industry, art, technology, trade, the United States of America. And it was only scientific, logical thought that enabled Ayn Rand to replace altruism with a morality of rational self-interest. Scientific, logical thought, that is what the mystic fears. So let's turn to the mystic. A mystic claims that reason is invalid, but that fortunately he possesses a non-sensory, non-conceptual, non-logical means of knowing. A mystic dispenses with the need for evidence and holds ideas in the absence of or in contradiction to the evidence. He holds ideas not by reason, but by faith. The mystic, however, cannot define or explain his alleged non-rational means of knowledge, whether he calls it extrasensory perception, female intuition, or divine revelation. All the mystic can do is tell you what his alleged means of knowledge is not. It is non-sensory, non-conceptual, non-logical. He can never specify what it is nor how it functions. For instance, by what physical organs and processes does a mystic's alleged extrasensory perception work? No answer. What difference in a woman's physiology enables her to receive intuitions that a man lacks? No answer. By what antenna does a mystic receive divine revelations? And on what frequency is the supernatural broadcasting? No answer. Unable to give any identity to his alleged non-rational means of knowledge, what in practice does it mean for the mystic to go by faith? If he accepts an idea in the absence of evidence, logic, argument, what is dictating his acceptance of an idea? How does he know, say, that his extrasensory perception shows that there are ghosts wandering about in this room? How does a mystic know that her female intuition tells her that the boss is up to no good? How does a mystic know that his divine revelations tell him to love his neighbors, not to eat meat on Fridays, and to slaughter infidels? In all cases, the answer is the same. This is what the mystic feels. Faith, stripped of its supernatural garb, is simply a license to believe whatever one wants to believe, a license to indulge one's feelings. In effect, it's a get-out-of-reason-free card. But reason permits no exceptions or exemptions. To be rational means to accept reason as an absolute. Reason permits no higher authority. It's not, I'll follow my ideas based on the evidence. I'll form my ideas based on the evidence, except when I really, really want to believe something else. It's, I'll follow the evidence wherever it leads. It's not, I'll form principles in mathematics or chemistry by means of facts and arguments, so long as I can exempt my belief in altruism or in God from the demands of logic. It's, I'll form principles in every subject matter by consulting the facts and logic. The moment one allows faith in the door, in other words, one jettisons devotion to truth. Now what ultimately dictates one's acceptance of any idea is not whether one sees that the idea is in fact true, but whether one finds the idea emotionally appealing. One's internal judge, one's rational mind, has been impeached. Nothing could be more unselfish than that. So here, the absolutism of reason is the fundamental battleground on which one must fight for one's life, one's values, one's country. The thinkers of the Enlightenment, including America's founding fathers, held reason as an absolute. Fix reason firmly in her seat, Thomas Jefferson wrote to his nephew, and call on her tribunal for every fact, every opinion. Question with boldness even the existence of a God. Because if there be one, he must more approve of the homage of reason than that of blindfolded fear. Close quote. The consequence of these thinkers holding reason as an absolute was that they achieved nobility in their own souls and the freest country the world has ever seen. But the resurgence of the mystical element in Western culture, the element that denies, subverts, and attacks the power of reason, now threatens their achievement. Only mysticism, as we saw, can exempt the doctrines of altruism and collectivism from the need for rational justification. Only mysticism, therefore, can create the putrid environment in which these doctrines need in order to grow. Whenever mysticism gains hold, whether it's the Dark Ages and Christianity, or the fascism and communism of the 20th century, the result is destruction and death. And unfortunately, the turn back to mysticism continues unabated in today's world. Again, you need to simply think of the subjects covered in past talks. In foreign affairs, for instance, the influence of mysticism should be obvious. We face an enemy animated by faith and a mystical ideology, which understandably seeks to eradicate its opposite, the country of reason, America. And our leaders, sympathetic to their own version of mysticism, dare not identify the enemy and fight him outright. Faith and prayer, Bush tells the nation repeatedly, are not the problem, but the solution. If you switch your focus to domestic issues, the situation is even worse. Consider, for instance, multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is the view that all cultures are equal in value, equally deserving of respect, emulation, moral praise. No amount of observation and logic could lead you to this doctrine. Reason will not tell you that the culture of America today is equal to that of the Congo, or that the achievements of the ancient Greeks are equal to the achievements of the ancient Egyptians. The doctrine of multiculturalism must be accepted on faith, which is exactly how it is preached in today's classrooms. And any rational student who tries to protest his indoctrination will be told that reason is a Western or male or white prejudice. Or consider environmentalism. Whatever the localized instances of smog and other forms of pollution, no amount of observation and logic could turn one against science, technology, industrialization, against chemical engineering, nuclear power plants, natural gas pipelines, and housing projects. These are precisely the ways in which man improves his environment, the means by which man rose from the filth and starvation of the cave to the splendor we see around us in America today. Yet this is what the ideology of environmentalism actually opposes, because its fundamental idea is not arrived at through reason, but through faith. Environmentalism holds, without evidence or argument, that wilderness, the earth as untouched by man, is the supreme value. Any tampering with wilderness, which is exactly what science and industrialization represent, must be destroyed because evil. Leave the Pacific forest and the Alaskan lands undeveloped, environmentalism cries. Give up without benefit your cancer-fighting drugs and power generation plants so that wilderness may endure. So the more honest intellectual spokesmen of environmentalism therefore openly admit that their ideology is a religion. It simply replaces the mystical call to sacrifice to God with the mystical call to sacrifice to wilderness. So there is an axis of evil loose in the world today, the axis of mysticism, altruism, collectivism. Mysticism opens the door to altruism, which opens the door to collectivism. But the axis can be opposed. The good is realizable, both in your life and the culture, if you discover its nature, if you learn what it means to think properly, to hold reason as an absolute and as your sole guide in life. If you learn that there is nothing more selfish and noble than the mind devoted to the truth and its own rational values. If you learn that there is a social system in which the individual is free to think, act, prosper. If you learn all this, then success and happiness await. But to learn this, you must grasp the allied ideas of individualism, egoism, reason. Individualism rests on egoism, and egoism rests on reason. And in my judgment, there is only one thinker who can teach you the full meaning of these three ideas, and that's Ayn Rand. So to conclude, let me simply say that I hope you will pick up and read her books, that you'll examine her arguments carefully, logically, because your freedom and happiness depend on it, and that you'll then join the battle for men's minds. Thank you.
anybody has any questions, the mic is right here in the middle.
Hi. I have a question about the idea that the
The
moral...
mic's in the,
Can you hear me? Or...
yes.
I have a question about the idea that the moral is the same thing as what is practical and what benefits yourself. Could you comment on the following scenario? You have to study for a final, and some teaching assistant who likes you has the final and says, here, these are an advanced copy of the questions. If you want it, here it is. And you look at it and say, well, if you take it, you could easily ace the final. You could pass the class and improve your GPA, and you think that will benefit you. And then you furthermore think, well, this is not a very important class, so I don't really need to understand the material, so I don't really need to study for the final. The material itself isn't that important to me. I understand the arguments that it's very practical. I also sense that it's immoral. Could you clear up my mind on that, please? Thank you.
Well, why are you even taking the class? I don't quite understand the scenario.
Let's say it's required. It's required.
It's a required class.
Yes, but unimportant. For a degree.
Do you want to say something on that?
Sure. I think the principle here is that once you allow yourself, the deception, once you allow yourself to deceive yourself and the lecturer in this case once, there's no way epistemologically for that to only occur once. The mind is an integrating machine, if you will. If you come to the conclusion, look, this was practical, I got away with it, I got my grade, hey, this is cool. I'll do it again. And again, and there's no way to control it, to set a finite limit. I'm only now going to lie when I'm absolutely 100% sure that I'm going to get away with it. There's no way to delimit your self-deception and your deception of others in such a way. So I think it goes to the very nature of the mind and the very nature of cognition as an integrating entity, and the fact that you cannot treat these things as isolated instances, and that indeed once it goes beyond that one event, it very soon becomes impractical, and because it is immoral. Make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. If you were actually in a situation where the class doesn't represent knowledge, and you're in a system where you're in a public system, you can't afford to go to a private school, the whole public system is a system of force. And if the class were really a BS class, then I could see a possibility of, if you've taken some classes, for instance, in graduate school in philosophy, symbolic logic and things like that, where it's not actually knowledge that you're forced to learn. You're actually forced to learn dogmas. There might be a situation in which it would be okay because it's not knowledge, in which by some means you would get through this requirement that's imposed on you. But if it's a class that actually represents knowledge, there's no point in faking that you have a knowledge that you don't possess. Get a C or D in the class. Rather than pretending that you have knowledge that you don't have. And I think it leads to the kinds of things that Dr. Brooke mentioned.
Yep.
Thank you, Doctor, for the lecture. I'm interested in Ayn Rand's epistemology, and I struggle through it a lot, and my question is sincere. You had mentioned that the senses are reliable because they register what they see. And my question is that I wouldn't know that information completely divorced from sensory input. I would never know that that is a fact except through my senses and that information processed by reason. Is that not circular? And if it is circular, why is it? Is that not circular? Is it not circular? And if it is circular, then why is it a cogent argument?
Okay. So the question is, do you basically? You can extend or broaden the question and say the question is, If you have to use reason to show that reason is valid, is that circular? That's basically what the question is. If you have to use your means of knowledge to show that your means of knowledge are valid, is that a circular reasoning? But ask yourself, how else could you show that your means of knowledge are valid other than by using your means of knowledge? You can't go outside of them. You can't, their faith and so on doesn't exist as a separate, you have another means of knowledge. So you have to use your means of knowledge to validate them. But you can do that by a process of showing what the senses are, how they function, that they're just causal systems, that they don't possess free will, and so that there's no possibility of error entering in the operation of your senses. If they're functioning, then they give you awareness of reality. And all that can be established, as you say, by using sensory data and by using logical reasoning. But it's not, I mean, if you call that circular, well, what is the alternative?
Exactly.
So in a sense, it's circular, but it's certainly valid, I think. So
Watching too many Matrix, too many reruns of the Matrix.
Thank you.
So it's not, I mean, if you're thinking of logic, the fallacy of begging the question, it's not begging the question to use your means of knowledge to show that they're valid.
Getting back to like the history of what went wrong in America, a little hint that Ayn Rand threw in Atlas Shrugged was Judge Narragansett when he said that he was going to add a part to the Constitution where Congress shall make no law abridging the right of free trade. Was that, is, I have the quote kind of right? I mean, that was like a little hint, kind of a critique of the Constitution where maybe statism leaked in. I mean, is there any other historical evidence that Ayn Rand has mentioned, like what went wrong with America's, how it started off kind of thing?
Well, I think that's part of it, that, I mean, that issue goes to the separation of economics and state. The clauses that gave the federal power, the federal government power to regulate interstate commerce, for instance, gave them power in the field of economics that in a true laissez-faire capitalist system, the government would not possess. So I think that was one of the means by which, but it's, if you think of it more abstractly in terms of the ideas, they had a very, very good, the Founding Fathers, a very, very good understanding of individual rights. But it wasn't a complete understanding, and in particular, they weren't able to define in terms of principles what act constitutes a violation of individual rights, that it's only the initiation of force against another person that violates his rights. And without that understanding, all kinds of people could run around and say, this person's actions violating my rights, and there was no objective way to say when there is a violation of rights, and so the government should step in, and when there isn't. And that, more abstractly, is what gave the government the leeway, the opportunity to enter in and control people's lives.
Do you think it was a cultural thing that they kind of took capitalism for granted, you know, because the family, like everyone says, I have to sacrifice for the family, that they kind of still believed in sacrifice, the altruism was still kind of there culturally?
Yeah, I think underlying all the claims about bogus violations of rights and so on is the altruist morality, that it was obvious that capitalism is a system of selfishness, and they don't like that. And because, as I said in the talk, that the morality of selfishness had not been defined until Ayn Rand, that the Founding Fathers, in effect, were mixed. They had certain implicit egoistic ideas, but they could never put them in terms of explicit formulation. When you look at their explicit ethics, it's more altruistic and so on. And so there was that fundamental tension that had to go either with altruism winning out or egoism winning out. But with no champion of egoism and with plenty of people on the altruistic side, it's not surprising what happened.
Yeah, another argument they always use is like the Constitution is outdated because of the Industrial Revolution. They didn't foresee that happening. Do you see any play the Industrial Revolution played in the advent of?
I think so. I mean, it's you can't really criticize. I mean, the Founding Fathers made mistakes, and the Founding Fathers didn't know a lot of things. But within the context of where they were at the time, you know, they were men of genius, and it's hard to imagine how they managed to create the United States in the context of their time. And indeed, the Industrial Revolution taught us all a lesson that they could not have known about the efficacy of reason as applied to the practical world, and the efficacy of laissez-faire capitalism and what it could, the potential of what could really be created. So within the context of the time that they lived, the revolution was phenomenal. If we had had at the end of the 19th century the kind of giants as we had had during the revolution, then the Constitution could have been redone, reworked, and improved now that you knew what the Industrial Revolution, what man's mind was capable of, and they could have taken care of these issues. There are people behind you, so thanks.
Actually, I have questions about what you were just saying too, but I'd like to go back just to sort of get a basis of the understanding. You started talking about epistemology and the importance of using reason to rationalize or justify reason. Well, if you start with a basis of reason, and it's hard to argue, if you don't have reason, then what's your alternative? I understand that problem, but there's also a fundamental problem with just using reason alone, because if you're going to use logic, you're okay if you go down the deductive road, but once you start down the inductive road, you are entering error into the conclusion. Is that not true?
I don't see how that follows. I mean, and certainly logic includes inductive logic and deductive logic. You can make an error in either one. You can make an error in deduction, but that doesn't show that the method somehow is faulty. It means you've misapplied the method. You can misapply the deductive side of logic or the inductive side. So I don't see a difference.
Well, that's true. You can certainly make an error in deduction, but the coherence of a deductive argument is going to be much stronger than an inductive argument. In a deductive argument, conclusions necessarily follow from their premises. In an inductive argument, which is how we use rationality most every day, because outside of math, everything is induction. And induction uses things like sensory perception and experience, both of which are subject to flaws. Neither one of them is 100% reliable. The only thing that's 100% reliable is drawing conclusions based on arguments that necessitate that conclusion. So once you start saying, oh, well, my experience is that when I turn the stove on, it heats up 100 times out of 100. It doesn't mean that the 101st time that stove's actually going to turn on.
Yeah, so I get the idea.
So with that induction, there is error.
Yeah, and that is a popular idea in philosophy, that induction is erroneous or is much less certain than deduction, because it involves claims about everything. It involves observations from a specific limited number of concrete things to making then a generalization about everything or everything in a certain class. And I mean, the details of why Ayn Rand argues that induction is valid and that properly performed, it does lead you to certainty. I mean, you can't cover in a Q&A, but she certainly thinks that generalization, if properly performed, by observing actual properties of things and basing your generalizations on causal links, not just simple enumeration. I've seen something 20 times, so the 21st time, this is what's going to happen. But penetrating to the cause and effect relationships among the things that exist in the world, then you can arrive at certainty. And let me just say two things. On regard to observations, no, I do not think it's true that observation, the use and the data the senses provide, is subject to error. You can misclassify what you perceive. You can see someone walking down the street far away and say, oh, that's my friend Joe, and it turns out to be a complete stranger. So you can misidentify what you perceive, but your actual observations I do not think are subject to error. And then second, in regard to that deduction is more certain than induction, all of deduction's premises or generalizations, they all come from induction. So if you actually thought that induction is not capable, the inductive method in logic is not capable of producing knowledge, then deduction would go out the window as well.
Well,
Indeed, all knowledge and all new discoveries are made through induction, so it works. Every scientific idea is an induced idea. For that matter, every idea that a small child comes to about reality, as primitive as it may be, is an inductive idea. There's nothing about thinking or about reason that necessarily always guarantees that you don't make mistakes. But the beauty with reason is it gives you the tool to correct those mistakes at the same time. That is reality, observation, the use of logic. But the validity of induction is all around us. In every new idea that anybody has ever come up with, it has been induced. And as Dr. Ghate has mentioned, every deduction requires an induction that comes before it.
no, not every deduction requires an induction. You can start with predefined premises, but
But the
beside
predefined
that,
premises are generalizations that required an induction.
like in math.
But there's another question here behind
But what I
you.
was getting at ultimately was not just, if you go by reason, your premise was that if you're going to use reason and rationality as the foundation for everything that's valuable, then you're stuck when you're trying to consider things that involve prediction. You couldn't possibly use 100% rationality in involving prediction or even in answering questions like things like what make good government, because you couldn't know and anticipate every future event, and you wouldn't have all that
Let's give some other
experience.
people an opportunity to ask a question, but let me say that I think that's just false. That is that you only use reason in order to make those kind of predictions. All those kind of predictions require reason, inductive and deductive, in order to make those predictions. And what alternative is there? That is blind faith or intuition or feelings about what you think will happen in the future. The only guide to any kind of valid prediction is the use of reason, the use of observation and coming to conclusions and generalizations from the past and the present about the future.
Now that we're in this mess that we're in, what would you interpret as Rand's concepts of how to correct the society that we're in now? Would this be towards a utopian concept of a free society? Or would it be something that would be gathered, everything go to private property? Would you relate on that, please?
I don't quite follow the question. Can you rephrase it maybe?
In a free society, I'm not here to, I'm just a old retired country boy, but I would assume that when we talk about Rand's concepts is that we are dealing in absolutes, and sometimes it's difficult to generalize an absolute, but you are, I would tend to believe that she's going towards a free society where government, when this country was formed under protection of private property.
So you're asking what would a ideal political structure be under, according to Ayn Rand?
Under Rand's concepts, yes.
Well, I think you're right in what you're saying about private property. It would be a society which respected private property, indeed in which all property was privately owned, in which the government did not, and the states and all other government entities did not own any property. All property was privately owned, and in which there was a complete, as Dr. Ghate said, there was a complete separation between economics and state, just like there is a complete separation, or should be a complete separation, between state and church. That is, the government left us to function from an economic perspective, to trade freely with no regulation, no taxation, no intervention, no use of force to prevent us from trading freely.
Well, when you have one question, then I'll leave, but what would happen under the state when you speak of pharmaceutical companies that are not regulated, but yet they possibly inflict harm upon the individuals that are involved with their medicines or their therapy?
Well, I mean, one, you can choose not to ingest their pills. That is what, I mean, that's their right is to sell to whom they want. And your right is not to buy their products if you think they actually are harmful. I mean, the whole scenario that companies, if they weren't regulated, would try to take advantage of everyone, left and right, that pharmaceutical companies would put poison in their pills, and food companies would put all kinds of things in their products and so on to poison people. I mean, I think this is ridiculous. And it's ridiculous because it's not in their self-interest to do that. But if you happen to have one fly-by-night company in a capitalist system that actually engages in fraud, it tells you here's some food and it's actually put poison in it, you can prosecute them under existing laws against fraud and so on. It's not a big problem.
Yeah, but under a free society, you wouldn't have that.
Well, that's
you
I
would.
was going to add to what Yaron said a little bit. If you wanted in more concrete terms, she said the government has three basic functions. It's to maintain a police force to deal with domestic criminals, to maintain a military to deal with foreign aggressors, and to maintain the courts of law to, as I said, to adjudicate among disputes of individual citizens. So if one person says the other person defrauded him or broke a contract and so on, you need an objective, impartial system run by the government, a system of legal courts, defined, codified laws in order to remove that whole area from just me saying, well, you've defrauded me, I'm going to shoot you, and so on. To bring all that use of force under objective, rational, predefined terms and principles. So, I mean, it's not that you have no government. You have a government that has specific, delimited powers and functions.
Yeah.
Actually, that question is a good lead into my question. It's also on the issue of private property. I agree for the most part that private property would work in a free society, sorry. But I believe there's certain things where I just can't see an application of private property as being beneficial, like in the example of just things that are considered natural beauties or, natural monuments, such as the Grand Canyon. It's a good example. How you could justify having something like that be privately owned if, say, the owner of the Grand Canyon wanted to charge an outrageous fee for entrance to the park, whereas now it's government owned. Yeah, whereas now it's government owned and I mean a fairly reasonable fee to get into the park. If you wanted to make it like a luxury getaway for the super rich to come to the Grand Canyon.
Well, let's take it one step further. How about the private owner wants to dam the Grand Canyon and create a lake in it?
Sure, I
If
was
it-
thinking
if
about
it
that,
was
but then
owned,
it
yeah.
also has ramifications for the whole Colorado River, which expands beyond the Grand Canyon, and
Sure.
you could say that he's causing harm to people outside of the area of the Grand Canyon. But if you just want to take something like that, it's not even a human creation that's been around since before humankind existed, and say that only certain people have a right to actually go there and witness this thing of beauty, how that could possibly be justified as being a beneficial system as private property actually, being a success in that application.
I mean, where do you put, let me start by, where do you put the limit? I decide that your backyard is really, really pretty, and I like the way it looks, and I don't want it touched anymore, and I want to invite all my friends and family to come and see it. I mean, it's your private property, you say, but I say, but it's a thing of beauty. So what? All the land before human beings arrived by that criteria is a thing of beauty, right? It's all untouched, beautiful wilderness. Does that mean that would exclude all human activity, which is exactly the environmentalist agenda? Look, if there is a value to beauty, and there is, Grand Canyon is spectacular and it's truly beautiful, then there's money to be made out of that, and somebody should, buy the Grand Canyon and sell tickets, and maybe fees will go up. But you know what? You pay higher fees today, because not only do you pay admission, but you pay taxes and miscellaneous fees indirectly. And indeed, many, many people who will never, ever see the Grand Canyon pay for the existence of the Grand Canyon through taxes and so on. So if you really want to create a system in which those treasures that people are willing to pay to see exist, then private property is the way to do that. is the way to preserve them, is the way to maintain them. They'd actually pave decent roads so you could see the place, not just, like Yosemite, they're talking about now shutting it down to all people because it's beautiful, so we don't want people to see it, because when the people arrive, they make it less beautiful, because the whole point of beauty is no people being there, right? And I'm not making this up. This is what's happening in places like Yosemite. So if you have the principle of private property, you have to have the principle of private property. You can't say, except where I think something's really, really beautiful and therefore should maintain, because then you define, the whole principle goes out the window, and then it's just a question of how many of us decide what is beautiful and therefore what we should take over from other people.
Well, I mean, to add to that, the alternative always comes down to, I'm going to force my value on you. And it comes down to that precisely because it comes down to that in cases where people wouldn't choose to buy that, or they wouldn't, maybe they're at an economic level where they wouldn't go to parks and so on. So they wouldn't be willing to pay for it, which means it's not a value to them in their lives. And the environmentalists, and whatever their stripe is, come along and say, look, this is a value to me, and I'm going to force you to maintain it. I'm going to force you not to use that land, say to build a dam, which would give you power and electricity and lights and so on, which would actually be of value to you, and which you would actually use your money for. They're going to stop you doing that. The only way they can stop you from doing it is to use force. So whenever you get those kind of calls, well, I value something different, it means they don't like the way the market operates, and they want to impose their values on it. And the only way they can do that is through government force. So it's completely illegitimate, I think.
And this is life or death. I mean, the Grand Canyon is an easy one because we all like it, and people would probably pay a price to go there, and I don't know what other use there is for the Grand Canyon. But take Klamath Lake. This is about a year and a half ago. Klamath Lake is a beautiful lake, and what's more important is it feeds this river with beautiful fish in it. And they're old fish, they've been around for 4,000 years or whatever. So the environmentalists want to preserve these fish. So when there's a drought, right, when there's a year where there's not enough water, they shut off the water supply to the farmers in Klamath Valley so that the fish can survive. Because they value the fish, right? And the farmers are starving. Or take it more extreme. Let's say the Grand Canyon is in India, where these people are barely surviving, right? I mean, people starve to death all the time, and they're struggling and so on. So you could use the Grand Canyon to produce electricity and food and real value to these human beings, or you could sell tickets to 10 tourists a year to see it, right? So it depends on the context. In an affluent society, in a capitalist world, some of these parks would be preserved because people would be willing to pay for their beauty. In a poorer country, they would be used quickly for their higher economic value, which would enhance people's lives. The standard, this is the key, the standard is human life, not the beauty of the rock. The standard is human life. What will add most to human life? And private property is what, in principle, is the only system that promotes human life. Who? Yep.
Oregon.
Yes.
Klamath is in Oregon.
Thank you. I think tonight you identified 3 criteria in altruism, collectivism, and in mysticism as the criteria. But then both of you, in both this lecture and in the last one, identified that our only true friend in the Middle East is Israel. And while they meet some criteria, I think when you apply the same criteria that Ayn Rand identified, they fail on mysticism and on collectivism. They do not provide property rights to anyone but of their religious sect. And thereby, I think that our presentation as a country should be more for the individualism in that society, and that while they may be the best of evils, they still have not met the 3 criteria that we identified would make them reasonable partners.
Well, that's a great question. Let's take the 3 criteria. Let's start with collectivism and work down. Yes, there is collectivism in Israel. There's no question. But as compared to the collectivism in the Arab world, Israel is a haven of individualism. Indeed, individual rights are protected in Israel, not only Jewish individual rights, the individual rights of Jews, but the individual rights of Arabs, Muslims, Christians in Israel are protected as individuals. They do have property rights over their land. They do have the right to go to court to adjudicate their cases, and they're treated equally with Jews. They vote. They serve in parliament. They serve in the government. So they are as individualistic a country as any Western country is, with the exception of the United States. The United States is more individualistic than they are. But even here, we have major collectivistic movements. Environmentalism, multiculturalism, the government, many of the United States government policies are based on collectivism. So therefore, should we abandon the U.S.? Should we say the U.S. is equal to Iraq because we have a little bit of collectivism poisoning our soul, whereas there it's destroyed the country and dominates the country completely? No, they're evil, we're good. We could be better. We sure want to work to become better, but we're still good. The same is true of Israel. They could be better, and we certainly advocate for Israel to become much better. We think that the United States probably has a better chance of becoming better sooner than Israel does, but it can become and should become better. But in comparison to who they're facing, the Palestinians, the Jordanians, the Egyptians, anybody in the Middle East, they are a haven of individualism. Take altruism and egoism, the same thing. Yes, there's a lot of altruism in Israeli culture. But again, as compared to the other side, they are individualistic. And the fundamental political system in Israel is pro-individualism and ultimately pro-reason. You can see that with the number of scientists and the number of engineers and the number of high-tech companies coming out of Israel. That's not mysticism being applied. Indeed, there's more, I would argue, there are more purely secular people in Israel as a percentage of the population in the United States. Do we condemn the United States? Because, we do, but we don't make it the equal of Iraq because President Bush says God save America at the end of each thing and talks about prayer all the time. We condemn that phenomena. We say that's bad, that's not good for America. And we condemn it in Israel. We say that's bad, that's not good for Israel. But in comparison to the enemy we're fighting, Israel and the United States are shining examples of individualism and reason. Okay? So it's the context of what we're talking about. And the reason we spend a lot of time on Israel is that I really think that here is in a very small place in the world, a very concentrated conflict is exactly what we're talking about. Here is essentially a conflict between collectivism and individualism, between reason and mysticism. Even if within Israeli society there are collectivistic tendencies and there are mystical tendencies. It's still true that as two systems, the Israeli system versus the Palestinian Arab systems, the one represents reason and individualism and the other one represents mysticism and collectivism. And that's why we support Israel. Not because we agree with everything there, we don't. Not because we agree with their particular form of collective and mysticism, we don't, just like we don't with its manifestation in the United States.
I thought tonight's lecture was excellent. Thank you for the talk. Just a couple of quick observations. One is that if you go downtown San Diego and you go to one of the public buildings, you'll see this big plaque everywhere. And it says, "The noblest motive is the public good." That's pure collectivism. Another thing is sometimes people, lay people and whatever everywhere, they decry selfishness. I think to be selfishness in your life, it takes a lot of effort. It takes a full application of your faculties and abilities. So to me, to be fully selfish is a big accomplishment. I'm trying to do that, but it's difficult.
Can you ask a question? We do have a line of questionnaires
Here's my
after you.
questions. To me, non-egoism literally seems to be stupid. So why is there so many people follow it? And then another question is, how can a person be more selfish and more rational? Do you have tips on that?
Well, in regard to the first about altruism seeming stupid, I think there are many motives that cause the appeal, that lead to the appeal of altruism. And Ayn Rand discusses that in many of her essays. So I'm going to refer you to some of she has, for instance, Altruism as Appeasement is one essay where she discusses why do people fall for this morality. But if we talk about it at the level of those who preach altruism, it's a form, as I said in the talk, it's a form of getting people to submit that they're going to bleed their life away, sacrifice, and there's going to be someone there collecting the sacrifices. And that to accept altruism requires a person to abandon his rational judgment. And that is one of the motives, I think, that people accept altruism, because they don't have to think anymore. It's in some ways, it's a very easy form of morality. As you said, to be selfish requires a lot of thought, a lot of effort, a lot of planning to think what actually will bring benefit to my life. The altruist is free of all that. Anytime his motive is to help other people, that's fine. Anything he does is moral. And it's, in effect, a license to do anything, so long as his motive is not to aim at his own good. And so he doesn't have to think anymore. And that, unfortunately, I think, is one of the motives that attracts people to altruism. It's an easy, non-thinking morality. But there are other reasons, too, and I encourage you to read in Ayn Rand's works about there are various motives, and some are complex about why people are attracted to altruism. But that I think, is one aspect of it.
And of course, there are plenty of people, if you don't know who to sacrifice for and what exactly to do as an altruist, there are plenty of people, movements to step in to tell you. And you can see, I mean that's people don't understand how the Nazis came about or how the communists took over, and that's part of it. If you're an altruist, in a sense, you're looking for somebody to tell you, who should I sacrifice for? You know, why? Where is it? Let me just, and you know, it's just a matter of an authority stepping in and saying, march to those particular orders.
Actually, I want to add something to what I said, but excuse me, because I don't want to paint it as that these people are necessarily stupid. And another, I think, major motivation for people's attraction to altruism is that they don't have an alternative. They don't have an alternative morality. And a person can't, a normal, healthy, psychological person will not abandon morality. He will not be an amoral creature and say, to hell with good and evil. He might cheat on his morality, he might violate its principles, he has to if he accepts altruism, because it demands sacrifice. And to practice altruism consistently means, in effect and in reality, to kill yourself. And so he can't practice it consistently, but he won't abandon it completely either. So he's caught in, well, he'll give lip service to altruism, he'll practice it on Sundays and so on. In the rest of his daily life, he'll try to cheat. He won't think, well, is this really moral or immoral, and so on. So he doesn't have an alternative. He can't conceptualize the field and say, altruism is just one morality, it's a completely corrupt morality, but there's an alternative, egoism. If he can't do that, then he's trapped.
And that's the importance of, I think, helping spread Ayn Rand's ideas, that is showing people that there is an alternative in morality. There is an egoistic morality that presents people with a completely revolutionary model that is completely the opposite of altruism. Because I do believe that there are people honestly searching. They want to stick to morality, yet altruism is unworkable.
Ayn Rand's philosophy of this individualism and objectivism and egotism. And in an ultimate form, would that concept be create a class warfare, and it's an antidote to the democratic ideals?
Well,
I'm speaking of it in ultimate form.
Well,
who are the classes at war?
Well, division between the people, have and have-nots.
No, is the short answer. There's no reason to believe that. Again, capitalism says, and Ayn Rand's philosophy says, that in justice, you deserve what you can make. That you deserve what, in an economic sense, what you are worth on the marketplace, in exchange for your labor. What creates class warfare is altruism. What creates class warfare is the idea that we tell everybody, you're all equal. We all deserve the same thing. We're all the same. There's no difference. We need to push down the people who are successful and raise up the people who are unsuccessful, and we need to create an egalitarian world. And when that doesn't succeed, then you get the people who don't have anything. They get frustrated, and they say, wait a minute, we deserve. Everybody's told us since we were in kindergarten that everybody should be equal. We deserve what that guy has because he has more than what Bill Gates has, because he has more than I do. Where's the equality? We were told that equality equals justice. Ayn Rand's philosophy says that no, that's wrong. Justice is not this equality of outcomes. Justice means getting what you deserve. And therefore, there's not this frustration that, wait a second, I didn't get what I was promised, because in the free market, you're not promised that to begin with. And there's actually a pride in whatever it is that you can attain. There's a pride of ownership. And yes, I can make X amount of money. That's mine. I did it. I made it. I don't have to rely on some government handout in order to equate me. I'm not jealous of that guy because I did this. I created it. It's mine. It's a selfish value. And that pride would, the whole issue of class warfare would go away. There wouldn't be any such thing. And indeed, the more socialist a country is, the more class warfare there is.
Well, that's certainly true, and that's at the moral level. If you think of it at the level of reason versus mysticism, as I said, Ayn Rand is a champion of reason, and you hold reason as an absolute. And that's what eliminates class warfare, because you have now a defined system by which to reach ideas, the method of logic, observation, the scientific method. And you have a court of appeal, the facts of reality. And men deal with one another by persuasion. You don't see class warfare among scientists, but you see class warfare among religious people. Every form of religion clashing and killing each other. And that's precisely because they arrive at their ideas not through reason, but by faith. And your faith can tell you anything, and it can tell you that everything he says is evil, that he's a witch, I got to burn him at the stake, and so on. So at that level, too, you can see that it's reason that eliminates class warfare, and it's mysticism, faith, that breeds it.
My question goes back to the Grand Canyon. I view my children as somewhat as an extension of myself, and therefore it's in my self-interest to protect the Grand Canyon so that my children and their children and their children's children can go there. Could I purchase the Grand Canyon? I would, but I know that even if it were for sale, it would be something that I couldn't afford, and that it could at some point, let's say in a utopian Ayn Rand society, be up for sale. And at that point, someone might purchase it. But then it would be held by that person, and that person's, it would create sort of a hierarchy of their, whomever they wanted to inherit it. And therefore, it would actually infringe upon the rights of future generations to ever be able to purchase the Grand Canyon unless they were able to create the income that would allow that. So my question centers around, isn't it in my self-interest to try to protect the Grand Canyon for my children?
Let me just,
have the Grand Canyon.
I want to protect my children. I love my children, and indeed, my dream for my children is for each of them to have a Ferrari. I mean, that's what I really want. I'm passionate about Ferraris. They're passionate about Ferraris. I want them each to have a Ferrari. Does that give me a claim on the Ferrari? Does that mean that I want the government to keep 2 Ferraris for my kids, so when they grow up, they'll be handed those Ferraris on a thing?
But it would be in your self-interest then to protect Ferraris.
No, it wouldn't be. What it would be in my self-interest, if I was interested in my children's well-being, in a generalized sense, is to promote freedom and to promote property rights and to promote their well-being through a society that advocates for reason and property rights, and a society in which Ferraris are not stolen. And in the same extent where Grand Canyons are not stolen. The fact that you value the Grand Canyon and want to preserve it for your children does not give you a right to steal it from somebody else.
And yet, a Ferrari is different than a tangible resource like the earth, which is only finite. You know, in other words, you can't recreate the Grand Canyon.
Hollywood does it all the time, but
you know what I mean.
I mean, the fact that it's uncreatable again does not. I love. Okay, so we want another one. I love the Mona Lisa, and I want the Mona Lisa at home. I mean, why? That's my value, supposedly. So the point is that your passion, what you personally want, does not give you a claim on somebody else's property, or on somebody else's time, or on somebody else's money. So I, for example, would like to see the Grand Canyon turn into a lake because I'm a fisherman or I like boating. Does that give me a right to just do that? No. If I bought it, then I could do what I wanted with it.
Wouldn't it be in my self-interest, though, to go ahead and approve the taxes that would protect it? Because that's something that I see as in my self-interest, to protect it for my children.
What is the value of the Grand Canyon?
You mean monetarily or?
No, what
Aesthetic.
value does it?
Aesthetic.
And why do you think that a capitalist system would eliminate aesthetic
No,
value?
I don't think they would eliminate it. I think they would sell, it would be up to the individual who owned it, what they would do with it.
So you think you wouldn't be able to afford it? Or I'm trying to get at what is driving.
Right, it could become exclusive. It could become a
so
place
you think
where
in
people
a
couldn't
communist system, say, everyone enjoys the natural environment?
Yeah, I guess in some ways, when it comes to natural resources, that's where the reconciliation
If you
doesn't.
look at the actual history of the East Bloc, I mean, if you want true environmental devastation, that's where you see it, because the property is not privately owned. Anyone does anything. It's all the public's property. So there was massive pollution.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we've probably talked this one out, but
let me just add, because you said it's in your self-interest to go and raise taxes for the Grand Canyon.
No, to protect it for my children.
To protect the grandchildren for your children.
Right.
And the falsehood there is that, it's in your best interest, let's say, to do that. And then it's in my best interest to raise taxes on everybody so we can buy Ferraris for my kids.
Right.
And to buy the Mona Lisa and so on. And what you have then is what we have today. You have a political system of pressure groups, each one believing that the government should protect what they hold as sacred, and that all of us should pay for it because nobody asked us, but each pressure group advocating for that. That's the importance of principles. You can't abolish the principle of private property just because 5 people think so, or for that matter, just because 100 million people think that. Either there is a principle of private property that protects all property, whether we want it for our grandchildren or not, or there isn't a principle of private property. You can't have a middle road. You can't have it only as it applies to your particulars, because each one of us has particulars. And therefore what you have is this is exactly the history of the United States. It started out with private property.
Right.
And then a few people got together and said, but I really want to preserve that. And they preserved that. And I really think that this industry should be regulated because I don't really like them. I like everybody else. Everybody else should be private. Everything else should be private property. We don't believe in regulation. Only this industry. Only the railroads, which is how it began. So they only regulated the railroads. And of course, then another group said, well, if you're going to regulate the railroads, let's regulate the steel industry. So there's no way to cap it and say only things that, Sam wants to preserve for his grandchildren, those are the things. You either have the concept of property rights, or you throw it out the window and you have communism, which is where you ultimately head.
Not really, but thank you.
Do either one of you listen to Dr. Laura at all?
Sometimes.
I would like to hear your opinion on her code of morality.
Do you want to do it?
I have rarely
You have no
listened.
opinion of that. I don't know. This is based on partial evidence, not a complete evidence. What I like about Dr. Law is she's an absolutist. To Dr. Law, there's right or wrong, and that's it. And she tells it as it is. She doesn't hold her punches. And I love that about her, and I think it's wonderful. Unfortunately, her code of morality is completely corrupt. That is, a code of morality is ultimately the altruistic code of morality. So she is a Puritan when it comes to sex. She is an altruist to a large extent when it comes to human behavior. Now, again, you can be a consistent altruist, so there are a lot of aspects that are individualistic and selfish in there. But ultimately, when you boil it down, she is a mystic and an altruist. And in that sense, she's wrong. So while, 50% of what she says I like, 50% of what she says I hate, but it's a hit or miss because she can be a consistent altruist, and when she applies individualism, it's, you can't tell when she's going to do it and why. But, you got to love anybody who says it like they think and don't hold anything back. And believe in right or wrong and black and white and where there are no grays. That I admire in her.
I personally believe that we have the greatest country in the world, and I'm starting to write a PhD on the myth of equality. And there's so many questions, but in particular what we're talking about tonight, we talk about Israel, we talk about the kibbutz. To me, that's collectivism in its purest form, if you want to say it that way. And I'm concerned about one specific issue, the street homeless in the United States. One of the big Marxist criticisms of the United States is we have no social safety net. And they bring up to Sweden and to Germany and so forth. 80% of the world or so is socialist. They've been trained that, and they believe that. And I'm curious what Ayn Rand would say about, is there an American moral obligation to take care of the street homeless, the real ones, the deserving poor, as we call them in America, as against the undeserving, the real undeserving poor, rather than the deserving. We make a cultural distinction here where other countries don't. But do we have a moral obligation to take care of those who genuinely cannot take care of themselves, that are severely mentally ill, physically disabled, culturally deprived? Is there any real moral obligation in capitalism?
Okay. No. There's, I think, absolutely...
As human beings, I mean.
Yeah, as human beings, there's no moral obligation to take care of the poor, the handicapped, and so on. But having said that, I mean, where does that moral duty come from? It's some form of mysticism. It's either that society demands that you take care of these people, or it's the God demands. And we reject both of those mystical claims to a claim on your time, on your life, on the individual's effort. But having said that, a capitalist system does not produce the kind of callousness that would let these people just roam in the streets like maniacs and so on. Yeah. And you had in the 19th century many, many private charities. And there's a reason when you have enough money, when you're a prosperous individual and society, where it's not a sacrifice to give to charity, and that is certainly appropriate. It's not. It doesn't make you a saint or something like that, but it is appropriate. And it's, as Dr. Brooks said in an earlier question, it's collectivist systems that actually produce the dog-eat-dog world that they say capitalism produces, because it's a system where you either are taken advantage of, or to survive you have to take advantage of other people. So it makes you, a collectivist system makes you hate other people, and underneath that, altruism makes you hate other people. If someone has more money than you and so on, he's evil, he should be giving you that money, but he's not doing it, so he's an SOB. If someone below you is handicapped and so on, he has a moral claim to your money, so he's a threat to your life. So you hate the people above you, you fear the people below you. Altruism produces a dog-eat-dog society. Capitalism allows the individual to flourish. It doesn't allow the individual to be exploited, and that produces actual goodwill among men. And that's why you see charities and so on occur in the 19th century. So there's no moral duty, but that doesn't mean that all the people who are schizophrenic and so on, who, as you say, who are legitimately impaired through a physical cause or whatever, you wouldn't be, in a capitalist system, they wouldn't be roaming the streets. No one gives a damn about them.
Thank you.
And notice that as we become more collectivistic in the society, as we become more socialistic, there are more of them. And that, so there's, as the government gets more involved in the economy, you have more homeless people. As regulation of building and other things become more prevalent, you have more homeless people. So the number of poor, the number of the number of people who are desperate out there only increases as capitalism disappears.
Okay, thank you.
I do believe that objectivism is the best philosophy created for man qua man. But we still have a long way to go, I believe, in really understanding mankind. And with the development that we've had in the last 20 years in the science of evolutionary psychology, I wonder if you scholars in the objectivism movement have examined or changed your opinion, or perhaps not accepted Ayn Rand's position that we are born tabula rasa.
No, certainly not if you understand what tabula rasa means. Tabula rasa means the mind is a blank slate. It means that it has no content prior to the working of its senses, and then its reasoning, its mind. And how would you get content in the mind apart from the senses? There's no scientific investigation, no experiments in psychology that go on 20 years and spend $2 billion are going to show that the mind acquires content absent the senses. So in that sense, if that's what you mean by tabula rasa, no, I don't think any scientific discovery can have any effect on that philosophical truth. But if you mean by tabula rasa that the mind has certain potentials, potentialities, and so on, when you're not speaking about content, but you're speaking about either its capacity to experience emotions, that one brain could be such that when it acquires content, it experiences emotions in a very violent form, and another in a different kind of form, so there can be different moods between people and so on. There can be that, I think, that science can discover, but that has no impact on the mind being tabula rasa.
I believe you said that there have been no scientific studies to demonstrate.
No scientific study that could overturn it.
I beg your pardon?
No scientific study that could overturn it.
Over time?
Could overturn the idea
the concept of tabula rasa?
Yes.
Well, I disagree with that, and I'm not here to, to have a full debate with it, but I would say that there have been studies, and if you're perhaps familiar with just the work that they've done with twins, identical twins who are raised separately, and yet they find personality characteristics that are quite similar. I believe that.
But that's exactly what I was saying. That if this is what you regard as a personality characteristic, that they're very excitable, that could, I think, I don't think it's been proven by science yet, but I think that could have a physical basis and so be inheritable. But that has nothing to do with tabula rasa. Tabula rasa means you get ideas, content, absent using your senses and thinking.
I understand that part of it, but Ayn Rand also said emotions
But
it's
it's not the emotion.
Concept.
They don't have the same emotions. What they might have is the same inclinations towards experiencing emotions in a particular way. Ayn Rand's theory of emotions is still completely correct. None of this scientific theory suggests that emotions are not consequences of ideas, are not automatic responses to value judgments. That's all still true. If there is a genetic component to the intensity, if there is, because I don't think it's been proven. I think all the studies with twins are very mixed, and for every study with twins that shows one thing, there's another study that shows quite the opposite. But even if it showed that let's say twins experience emotions in the same way, all that would say is that the genetics has something to do with the form in which you experience, not what the emotion is or what it is caused by, which relates to Ayn Rand's ideas.
Well, I would just say that going along with this concept of tabula rasa is a good way to cut off inquiry.
But there's no other way. The point is this: there's no other way to get an idea. How do you get the idea of freedom from a gene? Or how do you get the idea that that person X is somebody you should love, or person Y is somebody you should hate from a gene? There's no way to do that metaphysically. It is an impossibility. The only way you can get ideas, you can get knowledge, is from your senses and your mind integrating the information you receive from those senses. There's no other way. And nothing in science that can be discovered can contradict
that. I agree with that 100%.
Well, then that's all we're saying.
Right, but I do believe there are millions and millions of people who do not. And I'd like to understand the whole world, not just people who are like myself.
Well, they don't understand it because they have the wrong ideas.
Hi, guys. Sorry again. I'm still trying to integrate the ideas that you keep bringing in, and I'm having a hard time getting the philosophy to gel. So I'm asking for some clarifications on a couple of the statements you've made through this evening. One of them was, you said that the standard is more life. You made the statement that the standard that Ayn Rand's shooting for is more life. And I hear a theme coming through here that private property is a good thing. And I wasn't sure what more life meant. Does that mean quantity of life instead of quality of life? In which case, I would think that I'm not sure where you were going with that. And I was thinking that if private property is a good thing, then somehow quality of life must be an element in here. What exactly is this philosophy shooting for?
Well, I don't think she makes a distinction between quantity of life and quality of life. That it's the standard is man's life, which means all the requirements of his life through the whole of his lifespan. So, for instance, she argued that art is a need of the mind. It fulfills a certain function that a mind needs in order to keep going. It serves as fuel for a mind. It serves as a way of concretizing his abstract ideas. And she has a whole long argument for why he needs the experience of art. Now, would you put that, most people would put that on the quality side. It has nothing to do with the quantity, how long you live. But her whole perspective is to integrate the two and say this is a requirement of the mind, of a rational mind functioning. And so it's a requirement, so it helps you produce, live, acquire food, acquire shelter, and so on. So it's an integration of those two. So there's not a split between quantity and quality. If it actually improves if it's a quality of life improvement, then it is a survival benefit, which means it improves the quantity of your life. And the only way to improve the quantity of your life is to use your mind.
On the quantity of life side, there's the quantity of life for an individual, and then there's the quantity of life of all humans. And I was thinking, does she propose a philosophy where it's considered a good to have more people alive, or it doesn't matter how many people, could be one person alive, as long as that person has a good quality-quantity combination?
I mean, the standard is the individual's life, but that is not at anybody's expense. So the philosophy has nothing to say about how many people are going to live, as many people as can live. It doesn't have any requirements to control birth in order to limit the number of people, or to have lots of kids, so there are lots of people. The standard is the individual's life, and individual rights protect the life of each individual, so that one individual cannot take the life of another individual. Now, the practical result of capitalism is that both the quality of life and the quantity of life, which basically are the same thing, improve. And it's interesting that life expectancy increases when the quality of life is also increasing. That is, that the two go hand in hand under a capitalist system. And that when the quantity, the length of life, life expectancy, for example, in Middle Ages decreases, the quality of life is pretty rotten as well. So freedom, the protection of individual rights, private property, both contribute, because of what Dr. Ghate said, to both the quality and the quantity of life of the individual. And then however many people they are. I mean, that depends on individual people's choices of how many kids to have.
Okay, then on the private property side of that, you made a statement that said something like, well, either you have capitalism and private property, or you have communism, and clearly we don't have either one of them here in their pure sense. So is the blend not considered a good thing, or is there a possibility where sometimes private property isn't as good as a public collective of some sort, or is it always that there? I guess my question is there such a thing as a public good, a public resource of any sort? Water, air?
No.
No.
No, there is no such thing as a public good in the sense that the public has ownership over something. There is, to go back to the previous question, mixtures are unstable and they always gravitate towards the more consistent policy. And since America today is dominated by collectivism and altruism, the more consistent policy is not capitalism, private property. The more consistent application of altruism and collectivism is, communism or fascism, some kind of, absolutist system that controls everything. And I think that's where we're slowly moving towards. We're not moving towards freedom because that is not the dominant ideology out there. And the mixture is bad to the extent that private property is being denied. To the extent that there's government intervention in the economy, that is a bad thing for the individual's quality and quantity of life. And no, it's never the case where public property or collective good is better for the individual. Never.
All right. One of my questions also was...
Well, I think we should cut it off here, but I want to say something. If you want a bodily analogy to the mixture, it's if a patient has cancer, a cancer might not kill the patient in a day, but that doesn't mean that the mixture is somehow stable and, it doesn't matter if he has cancer. It undermines him over a long period of time. And it's the same when you have a mixture that you have in a welfare state now. If the mixture, as what has happened in the U.S., that it was an individualist system that then collectivist, altruist, mystical ideas are penetrating, it takes a while to kill the patient. But to kill it, it will.
Please excuse me, just one more. I think this will tie more of it together. I'm having a real hard time understanding the concept of value. It sounds like when they brought up the Grand Canyon, that was, you said, how can you choose between your value and my value? Do values not play any role here? And if the answer is no, then how can you place a value on private property? Or what is the role that values play?
Well, this might help. Values are not established by feelings or emotions. So the fact that you feel that you want something, that you desire something, does not make it a value. A value is something, it has a factual basis. It's something that in fact benefits your life, enriches it, secures it, benefits it. That an alcoholic desires a drink doesn't show it's a value for him. And it's the same that people who've been indoctrinated with environmentalism and now come to think that a snail darter or the wilderness is a value to them. It does not show it's a value just because they desire it.
And just because you desire it does not give you the right to take it from somebody else. And that's really the point we were making before. So just your desire does not make it a value. Indeed, value is at the core of Ayn Rand's ethics. It is the pursuit of the ultimate value, which is life, which the ethics is all geared about. Rationality, reason is a value. So Ayn Rand's ethics are all about the pursuit of values, but values objectively discovered that truly enhance your life rationally. And when you have an understanding of what those values are, then you discover that indeed there is no conflict between my values and your values. That we all pursue our own selfish, individualistic values without conflicting with one another.
Thanks for your talk. Appreciate it. Following up on these issues, do you think Rand would say that the right to life trumps property rights, that value itself? Would that be the only value that would supersede property rights, or would it?
No, rights don't trump each other. Rights form a consistent whole. So a right to life is a right to all the actions that a rational being requires in order to survive. And all the other rights, a right to property, a right to the pursuit of happiness, a right to liberty, are aspects or derivatives of a right to life. They specify the kinds of actions a rational being has to take in order to live. So there is no, the minute
But
this is a
it relates
common,
to lifeboat situations, you know, emergency situations, which Rand addressed. She said that you shouldn't define a morality based on an emergency situation.
yeah, but that's a crucial difference.
But
that
a lot of these people are
just a minute.
portraying this idea of property rights, where people own something. And
Yeah, I understand the
therefore-
question, and I understand all those lifeboat situations and so on. But there's a difference between defining political principles and defining a morality. And political principles come from your moral principles, but they apply in a certain context. Rights apply in civil society, where you're trying to establish a government, and this is your fundamental principle for establishing a government. They do not apply on lifeboats. You're not talking about a civil society. And part of the reason that you can characterize that as an emergency situation is precisely because the normal mode of life is not possible. So morality can tell you certain things about a lifeboat situations, the kinds of things that are trumpeted in every stupid ethics class. But they're not very relevant to your life. You're not on a lifeboat all the time wondering, well, there's a morsel of food, there's this other guy, can I kill him to stay one more day and be rescued and so on. These are not actual situations that you face in your daily life. And morality is not, you don't create the principles of morality to deal with those situations. And certainly politics and the question of individual rights and so on. You don't define principles. A government and so on is not even a possibility on a lifeboat.
I think the main issue is you don't have the right to life at the expense of others. You know, these Mexicans across the border, they're starving. Do they have the right to break into a farmer's house and get some food? No, because property rights supersede their survival needs at that point. Would you agree with that? I mean, it's the issue of deontological versus consequentialist view of morality. Do you take a principled stand on property rights, or does it just suit the needs of the subjective values of the person at the time? That's the issue. Anyway, that's kind of off the topic I wanted to address, which was, what do you think of the idea of the public good in government, that in a laissez-faire system, is that not the public good? Is that not public property? And would that be a contradiction in terms? Wouldn't you see as an evolution of laissez-faire capitalism in the distant future an eventual privatization of those services based on the law of non-contradiction, just like in Galt's Gulch?
I didn't even get that last one.
Yeah, I mean, what you're asking is wouldn't, I think, wouldn't ultimately, if you took these principles to, you know, to the logical conclusion, you would get private armies and private police forces and private judiciaries and no government at all.
Yeah, everything would be privatized.
And the answer is no, because of the right to life and because life is the standard. Life is a standard, if you go over the objectivist ethics, life as a standard demands a particular political system, and it demands that the government is formed to hold the monopoly over the use of force, and that is not a public good. That is the requirement of every individual's life. And as a consequence of that, no laissez-faire, properly founded on a proper philosophical foundation, no laissez-faire government will ultimately become a anarchist libertarian utopia. That just won't happen because it's wrong for human life. It is a violation of the right to life. It is a violation of life as the standard for the individual.
But if we're looking at property rights, aren't the institutions of government located on what would be public property or private property?
they could, I mean, these are technical questions that you could go on forever on, and they're not that important, but they could be on private property that the government leases. I mean, so what? I mean, where are we going with
And the
this?
government is a public institution, is what you're saying. So
The
it's
government
not-
is an institution that has funds that are collected from the public in one way or the other, either for fees or through voluntary contributions, and it uses those funds to lease property, to buy tanks, to dress policemen, and they function based on the laws. Absolutely.
Okay.
But the government is the servant of the people, created by the people. So it's not some super entity standing above them that is going to take away. I mean, if it's properly defined and based on the principle of individual rights, it's not something that has the power to violate their rights, to deprive them of property and so on.
One last quick question. I'm sure you've countered people who have said laissez-faire capitalism has never been implemented. How do you know it works? So the pragmatic point of view versus the moral point of view.
Well, how did people know the Earth was round before, everybody thought it was flat?
But I would go much further than that. What the socialists say, and the collectivists and the communists, is that in the future, somehow they're going to create a utopia. We'll get another 5-year plan in the Soviet Union. Right now, it's incredible hardship, people are starving. But somehow, 5 years from now, everything's going to be hunky-dory. So the actual evidence of the system that people see around them day to day is that it doesn't work, it leads to misery, it leads to poverty. When you have a capitalist system, or even semi-capitalist, or a system that's aiming towards capitalism, the more capitalist it is, the more prosperous, the richer the people are. America was better than Great Britain. Great Britain was better than other semi-free countries because it had more freedom. So the more freedom, you get more prosperity. It's not then a leap of faith to say if you had a completely free society, that would be the most prosperous society.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
What better means?
Sorry?
When you said more capitalist is better, what's
Quality of life, more prosperity.
It creates the conditions in which human life is possible. If you look, say, at the history of capitalism and the populations that were made possible in Europe and America, and then at the quality of life of all those many, many more people living because the system was now approaching a free system. That's what we mean, that it's conducive to life, to the individual's life.
The population of Europe tripled during the 19th century. Life expectancy expanded dramatically, and the quality of life, by every dimension that you could measure, improved during the 19th century as a result, a direct result of capitalism. So it's on every axis you wish to measure. Yeah.
If you reject mysticism, using logic and reason alone, how can you explain the existence of creation, the universe, all matter? Because all of our science says that everything has to have an origin, and if that's true, where did all the matter and energy come from for the Big Bang? Consequently, doesn't that sort of science and logic require a certain mysticism of its own?
No, I think definitely not. And the fact, the basic fact that things exist, whatever the basic constituents or elements of the universe, whatever they happen to turn out to be, the fact that they exist does not require explanation, and it can have no explanation and no cause. What would be the cause of the basic fact that things exist? Either, that's a rhetorical question. Either the
point being is, isn't it just as easy to believe in God? And it seems to me that you reject, or the philosophy of God as part of mysticism, as it is to believe in pure science.
No, but that's fantastic, because the fact that things exist is directly observable to you. Just look around the room. The positing of a God, leaving aside that it doesn't explain anything, requires faith, because you have no evidence that there is a God. You have all the evidence you could possibly have that things exist. So to put those two on par is, I don't know how you could do that.
It doesn't make sense to me that matter came out of nothing.
But it makes sense that it came out of a divine consciousness?
Where did that divine consciousness come from?
It makes more sense that there is a creator that created it originally that someday I will find out the answer to, but I can't have it here. Our science says that we have to have all the answers here, everything is explainable, and therefore, there is no God.
All our science says is that what's here is here, and that we try to understand what's here. It's meaningless to ask, where did what's here come from? In a sense of the beginning, because the beginning of what? The universe is everything that there is.
Where is it going to come out of?
What's it going to come out of? It doesn't come out of nothing. That's true. There is nothing. There is no something from nothing. So the conclusion is that it's always existed. It's here. That's it. But to postulate a consciousness that created it, where did the consciousness come from, and who created the consciousness? But it's okay for you to think the consciousness has existed forever, and it had its own reasons to create the world, rather than just postulate that matter just exists, whatever the constitutes of the universe are, just existed forever. That is, the constitutes of the universe are I can see them, I can touch them, I can feel them, they're here. God, you have no evidence. Absolutely not a shred of evidence for his existence, and therefore doesn't exist.
The point is that all of our science says that everything has to have an origin. If
there
is a creator...
That's not what the science says. That's not what science says, that everything has an origin, and the scientists who say that are as mystical as the people who believe in God.
Okay,
there's nothing in science, true science, to suggest that everything has an origin.
Okay, then that gets back to what I asked about. Does science require a certain mysticism to believe that everything always existed?
No, that's not a belief. That's just, it's here. All you really care about in science is it's here, and now you try to understand, what's here. That's it. But put it this way. You can't postulate, I think, you can't postulate a beginning of the universe, because then you have to postulate something from which it began. If the universe is everything that is, was, and will be, then that's it. We're in the universe. You can't go outside the universe and put a timeline on it. There is no beginning and there is no end. It just is. This is it. And that's not a belief. That's just common sense.
I disagree. Go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. Gave me a lot to think about. I'm under the impression that my life has benefited a great deal from altruistic acts. So my question is, are the sacrifices that you make for your children altruistic?
Well, if they're sacrifices, yeah. As somebody who has kids, I should answer this, I guess. I don't think that a rational parent makes sacrifices for his children. A rational parent makes certain choices between values. So when you decide to have children, you should think about it beforehand, first of all, and decide that this is something you want to do. You're taking on a certain commitment. And you should decide that not based on perpetuating your gene or based on the fact that your parents had children, so you have to have children, but based on the fact that these children are an enormous value for you. So a sacrifice means giving up a higher value for a lesser value or for a non-value. So let's say I can't go out anymore because I have to stay home with my kids. I can't go partying. I can't go partying on Friday night. I always used to go on Friday night to the bar and party. Now I have to sacrifice stay with my kids. Well, is that true? If I really think about it, is going out every Friday night to the bar a higher value than being with my kids? Well, if in the grand scale of things that's a conclusion you come to, you shouldn't have had kids to begin with. So no, having my kids is more important to me. Having my kids succeed is more important to me. That's why I had the kids, and I've taken on a certain commitment. Just like you might get into a contract, for example, and at certain points in the contract, you would rather not do what the contract says you should do. It's just unpleasant. Hell, but you signed that contract. That's part of the deal. And that's the same with having kids. It might not feel good at the moment, but rationally, it is not a sacrifice. And rational parents, now I'm not saying all parents don't sacrifice. Many parents do sacrifice for their kids. And that's unfortunate for the parents. And what does it cause the kids to feel? Starts with a G. Guilt. Altruism is guilt-inducing. And do you think that does that lead your kids to be happier, more successful, more prosperous if what you induce in them is guilt? No. So I never tell my kids I'm sacrificing for them. When I do something for them, I do it because I want to do it, because they are higher value than what I'm giving up at the moment. Just like in any other trade. When you buy an automobile for $20,000, are you sacrificing $20,000 for the automobile? No. The automobile represents a higher value to you than the $20,000. That's why you're willing to give it up. And is the auto dealer sacrificing the automobile to you by taking $20,000 from him? No. Because to him, the automobile is worth less than $20,000, and he's happy to take the $20,000. It's all a trade, and your relationship with your kids should be, the same way in fundamental terms.
Thank you.
I feel like I just had to make an observation since you responded to something I was saying. You had said that since the Second World War, the nations had improved in their quality of life as a result of capitalism, but they also improved their quality of life with the increase of regulation, which is, from what I gather, inimical to your idea of what capitalism is. And regulation definitely has gone hand in hand with improved economies.
No. Indeed, every industry that has introduced regulation has deteriorated quickly into oblivion. The industry most regulated in the United States in its history are the railroads. The railroads were in such great shape in the 1950s that we had to build an interstate highway system because you couldn't get goods from one part of the country to another. The regulation completely destroyed the railroad system. Today, healthcare is heavily regulated, and it is on the verge of being destroyed. As if you open up the newspapers, doctors are leaving, they don't want to practice. Drug companies are not investing a lot in new drugs because of the regulations of the introduction of new drugs and price caps. Every industry, every single one. Banking goes through these crises because of regulation. In every industry, regulation only brings disaster and harm. So we have, the quality of life and the economy has expanded over the last 50 years in spite of the regulation. It is a tribute to the greatness of those individuals who, in spite of the regulations, go out and create and work and succeed. In spite of the government putting them in shackles and chains, that we have a higher standard of living. Not because of the regulations. Government only has the power in economics to destroy, not to create.
2 comments. Remember, there are several different kinds of regulation. Many of the regulations in this country have to do with employers' responsibility towards health and safety of their employees.
Absolutely, and as a consequence of those regulations, you have more unemployment than you would otherwise.
You can't make fraudulent claims. You can't knowingly.
Fraud is not a regulation. Fraud is
a regulation.
Is not a regulation. Fraud is the protection of property rights, and it is a law, and it's existed in common law for generations. It's nothing new. All the labor regulations that we have on the books today are harmful to labor and to the employer. They are harmful to everybody involved.
If you look at unemployment rates across the world, the places that have the highest unemployment rates are the non-capitalized places with very few regulations at all.
Not true. Absolutely not true. The highest unemployment in the world are in places like Europe that have massive regulation over employment. And indeed, American unemployment was highest during the Great Depression when Roosevelt puts in the New Deal the highest protection of employees ever in the history of this country, and you had the highest unemployment. If you go to Germany and you go to France, their unemployment is much higher than the United States because they protect employees. And the freer a country is, truly free, we're talking about protection of property rights, true capitalism, the lower the unemployment. And if we did not have employment regulations in this country, I'll make an economic prediction, unemployment would be far less than half of what it is today. There would be basically no such thing as unemployment in America today. It's only regulation that brings unemployment.
If that were true, then countries that had the fewest laws would have the best and freest economies.
No, because laws and regulations are not the same thing. I said, countries that protect property rights, that's what capitalism is. It's not anarchy. Somalia is not a free country because they don't have any laws. It is a eat dog anarchy in which people try to kill each other. I'm talking about the protection, laws that protect property rights, that don't intervene in the economy, don't tell businessmen what they can do, but prevent theft and fraud. And, people have already all left, so I think we should end it here. Thank you.
Get a definition of regulation.